C.H. Spurgeon's Autobiography, Chapter 6, being read by Peter John Parisi, also known as Brian Dean. In Instances of Home and School Life. No man can write the whole of his own biography. I suppose if the history of a man's thoughts and words could be written, scarce the world itself could contain the books. So wonderful is the tale that might be told. Of my life at home and at school, I can only give a few incidences that I am able to recall them after the lapse of 40 or 50 years. One of the earliest, and one that impressed itself very deeply upon my childish mind, relates to my first and last debt. When I was a very small boy, in pinafores, and went to a woman's school, it so happened that I wanted a stick of slate pencil, and had no money to buy it with. I was afraid of being scolded for losing my pencil so often, for I was real careless little fellow, and so did not dare to ask at home. What then was I to do? There was a little shop in the place where nuts and tops and cakes and balls were sold by old Mrs. Pearson. Footnote. Extract from the Excess Telegraph, February 8, 1881. Interments at Colchester Cemetery for the week ended February 7, 1881. February 5th, Esther Pearson. St. Leonard, 96 years. And a footnote. And sometimes I had seen boys and girls get trusted by the old lady. I argued with myself that Christmas was coming and that somebody or other would be sure to give me a penny then, and perhaps even a whole silver sixpence. I would therefore go into debt for a stick of slate pencil, and be sure to pay at Christmas. I did not feel easy about it, but still I screwed my courage up and went into the shop. 1 farthing was the amount, and as I had never owed anything before, and my credit was good, the pencil was handed over by a kind dame, and I was in debt. It did not please me much, and I felt as if I had done wrong, but I little knew how soon I should smart for it. How my father came to hear of this little stroke of business, I never knew, but some little bird or other whistled it to him, and he was very soon down upon me in right earnestness. God bless him for it. He was a sensible man, and none of your children's spoilers. He did not intend to bring up his children to speculate and play at what big rubes call financing, and therefore he knocked my getting into debt on the head at once, and no mistake. He gave me a very powerful lecture upon getting into debt, and how like it was to stealing, and upon the way in which people were ruined by it, and how a boy who would owe a farthing might one day owe 100 pounds, and get into prison and bring his family into disgrace. It was a lecture indeed. I think I can hear it now, and can feel my ears tingling at the recollection of it. Then I was marched off to the shop like a deserter marched into barracks, crying bitterly all down the street, and feeling dreadfully ashamed, because I thought everybody knew I was in debt. The farthing was paid amidst many solemn warnings, and the poor debtor was set free, like a bird let out of a cage. How sweet it felt to be out of debt! How did my little heart vow and declare that nothing should ever tempt me into debt again. It was a fine lesson, and I have never forgotten it. If all boys were calculate with the same doctrine when they were young, it would be as good as a fortune to them, and save them wagon loads of trouble in after life. God bless my father, say I, and send a breed of such fathers into old England to save her from being eaten up with villainy, for what with companies and schemes and paper money and nation is getting to be as rotten as touchwood. Ever since that early sickening, I have hated debt as Luther hated the Pope. Another occurrence of those early days is rather more to my credit. Long after my own sons had grown to manhood, I recalled to my father's recollection an experience of which, until then, he had never had an explanation. My brother as a child suffered from weak ankles, and in consequence frequently fell down, and so got into trouble at home. At last, hoping to cure him of what father thought was only carelessness, he was threatened that he should be whipped every time he came back showing any signs of having fallen down. When I reminded my father of this regulation, he said quite triumphantly, yes, it was so, and he was completely cured from that time. Ah, I answered, so you thought. Yet it was not so, for he had many a tumble afterwards, but I always managed to wash his knees and to brush his clothes so as to remove all traces of his falls. Illustrations from childhood days. I recollect when a child, seeing on the mantelpiece a stone apple, wonderfully like an apple too, and very well colored. I saw that apple years after, but it was no riper. It had been in favorable circumstances for softening and sweetening, if it ever would have become mellow. But I do not think if the sun of the Ecuador had shone on it, or if the dews of Hermon had fallen on it, it would ever have been fit to be brought to table. Its hard marble substance would have broken a giant's tooth. It was a hypocritical professor, a hard-headed mocker of little children, a mere mince of God's fruits. There are church members who used to be unkind, covetous, sensuous, bad-tempered, egotistic, everything that was hard and stony, and are so now. Have they not mellowed with the lapse of years? No. They are worse, if anything, very dogs in the house for snapping and snarling, ranting and devouring, great men at hewing down the carved wood of the sanctuary with their axes, or at least filling up wells and marring good pieces of land with stones. When the devil wants a stone to fling at a minister, he is sure to use one of them. When we were small children, we had a little plot of garden ground, and we put our seeds into it. I well recollect how, the day after I had put in my seed, I went and scraped the soil away to see if it was not growing. As I expected, it would have been after a day or so at the very longest, and I thought the time amazingly long before the seed would be able to make its appearance above ground. That was childish, you say. I know it was, but I wish you were as childish with regard to your prayers, that you would, when you have put them in the ground, go and see if they have sprung up, and if not at once, be not childish in refusing to wait till the appointed time comes. Always go back and see if they have begun to sprout. If you believe in prayer at all, expect God to hear you. If you do not expect, you will not have. God will not hear you unless you believe He will hear you. But if you believe He will be as good as your faith. He will never allow you to think better of Him than He is. He will come up to the mark of your thoughts, and according to your faith, so it shall be done unto you. When we used to go to school, we would draw houses and horses and trees on our slates. And I remember how we used to write house under the house and horse under the horse. For some persons might have thought the horse was a house. So there are some people who need to wear a label round their necks to show that they are Christians at all, or else we might mistake them for sinners. Their actions are so like those of the ungodly. I remember once, when a lad, having a dog, which I very much prized, and some man in the street asked me to give him the dog. I thought it was pretty impudent, and I said as much. The gentleman, however, to whom I told it, said, "Now suppose the Duke of so-and-so," who was a great man in the neighborhood, "asked you for the dog. Would you give it to him?" I answered, "I think I would." So the gentleman said, "Then you are just like all the world. You would give to those who do not need." I have seen, when I was a boy, a juggler in the street throw up half a dozen balls or knives and plates and continue throwing and catching them, and to me it seemed marvelous. But the religious juggler beats all others hollow. He has to keep up Christianity and worldliness at the same time, and to catch two sets of balls at once. To be a free man of Christ and a slave of the world at the same time must need fine acting. One of these days, you, Sir Juggler, will make a slip with one of the balls, and your game will be over. A man cannot always keep it up and play so cleverly at all hours. Sooner or later he fails, and then he is made a hissing and a byword, and becomes ashamed, if any shame be left in him. I can never forget the rushed light which dimly illuminated the sitting room of the old house, nor the dips, which were pretty fair when there was not too many of them to the pound, nor the mold candles, which came out only when there was a party or some special personage was expected. Short sixes were very respectable specimens of household lights. Composites have never seemed to me to be as good as the old sort, made of pure tallow, but I dare say I may be wrong. Nevertheless, I have no liking for composites in theology, but perhaps the genuine article prefer the genuine article without compromise. I have no liking for composites in theology, but prefer the genuine article without compromise. A nightlight is a delightful invention for the sick. It has supplanted the rushlight, which would frequently be set in a huge sort of tower, which to me, as a sick child at night, used to suggest dreadful things. With its light shining through the round holes at the side, like so many ghostly eyes, it looked to me staringly. And with its round ring on the ceiling, it made me think of Nebuchadnezzar's burning fierce furnace. Once I thoughtlessly hung a pound of tallow candles on a clothes horse. This construction was moved near the fire, and the rest was a mass of fat on the floor, and the cottons of the candles almost divested of tallow, a lesson to us all not to expose certain things to great heat, lest we dissolve them. I fear that many a man's good resolutions only need the ordinary fire of daily life to make them melt away. So, too, with fine profession and the boastings of perfection, which abound in this age of shams. I have a distinct remembrance of a mission room where my father frequently preached, which was illuminated by candles in tin sconces which hung on the wall. These luminaries frequently went very dim for want of snuffing, and on one occasion an old man, who wanted to see his hymn book, took the candle from its original place. Out of his hand he made a candlestick. His finger and thumb he used as a pair of snuffers, and finding it needful to cough, he accidentally made use of his mouth as an extinguisher. Thus the furniture of a candle was all contained in his own proper person. We had practical fun with candles too, for we would scoop out a turnip, cut eyes and nose in the rind, and then put a candle inside. This could be judiciously used to amuse, but it might also be injudiciously turned to purposes of alarming youngsters and greenhorns, who ran away under the apprehensions that a ghost was visible. Other things besides turnips can be used to frighten foolish people, but it is a shame to use the light of truth for such a design. During one of my many holidays at Stambourne, I had a varied experience which I am not likely to forget. My dear grandfather was very fond of Dr. Watts's hymns, and my grandmother, wishing to get him to learn them, promised me a penny for each one that I should say to her perfectly. I found it an easy and pleasant method of earning money, and learned them so fast that my grandmother said she must reduce the price to half a penny each, and afterwards to a farthing, if she did not mean to be quite ruined by her extravagance. There is no telling how low the amount per hymn might have sunk, but grandfather said that he was getting overrun with rats, and offered me a shilling a dozen for all I could kill. I found at that time that the occupation of rat-catching paid me better than learning hymns, but I know which employment has been the more permanently profitable to me. No matter on what topic I am preaching, I can even now, in the middle of any sermon, quote some verse of a hymn in harmony with the subject. The hymns have remained with me, Well, those old rats for years have passed away, and the shillings I earned by killing them have been spent long ago. Many memories were awakened one day when I opened my copy of White's Natural History of Selborne and read the following inscription: Stockwell School, Colchester, adjudged to Master C. Spurgeon as the first-class English prize at the half-yearly examination, December the 11th, 1844. T. W. Davis, examiner. After I had once succeeded in gaining my prize at the top of the class, I was careful to retain it, except at one particular period when I made up my mind to get right down to the bottom. My teacher could not explain my unusual stupidity until it suddenly occurred to him that I had purposely worked my way from the top of the class, which was opposite a drudgery door, down to the foot, which was next to the stove. He therefore reversed the position of the scholars, and it was not long before I had again climbed to the place of honor, where I had also the enjoyment of the heat of the fire. Writing to the Christian World in February 1892, Mr. R. D. Chevrolet, that's Chebeley, of Harrogate, who had been a fellow scholar with C. H. Spurgeon at Colchester, said, Stockwell House, Colchester, where Charles Haddon Spurgeon was being educated from the age of 11 to 15, 10 to 14, was a thoroughly good middle-class classic and commercial school. Mr. Henry Lewis, the principal, was a man whose literary attainments were of superior order, and for years he was assisted by a very scholarly man in the person of Mr. Leadings, whose death occurred only very recently. Mr. Leading was the classical and mathematic tutor. His teaching was very thorough, and in Charles Spurgeon he possessed a pupil of a very receptive mind, especially with Latin and Euclid. I remember well that in both of these subjects he was very advanced, so that he left Stockwell House a thoroughly well-educated youth. In fact, quite as much so as it was possible for him to obtain outside the universities. In The Sword and the Trowel, October 1890, Mr. Spurgeon made the following kind reference to the house-going of his old tutor. The Northwood papers contained the following death: Leading, September 11th, at the Academy. West Norwood, Edwin Sennett, that's S-E-N-N-I-T, Leading, L-E-E-D-I-N-G, age 77. This Mr. Leading was usher at the school of Mr. Henry Lewis of Colchester in 1845, and I, C.H. Spurgeon, was one of the boys under his care. He was a teacher who really taught his pupils, and by his diligent skill I gained the foundation upon which I built in after years. He left Colchester to open a school of his own in Cambridge, and I to go first to Maidstone and then to Newmarket for some 2 years. Then we came together again, for I joined him at Cambridge to assist in his school, and in return to be help to my studies. He has left on record that he did not think that there was need for me to go to any of the dissenting colleges, since I had mastered most of the subjects studied therein, and his impression that I meant well with him have readily passed through the university if the pupil had not come in the way. His school did not succeed, for he was not well enough to attend to it, and in after years I found my old tutor struggling at West Norwood against the difficult circumstances which board schools have created for private ventures. He was a good man and true, a man of prayer, faith, and firm principles. His life was full of trials, and I have seen him greatly depressed, but he has honorably finished his course and has gone to his reward. I have always looked to him, among the many of whom I have gathered help, as my tutor. Thus the tutor has gone home, and the scholar has not forgot that in due course he will follow.